Hey guys, welcome to The View from the Front. My name is Stan, and just in case this is the first time you've ever joined us, welcome by the way, here's what I do in every episode. First, I cover hotspots happening around the world that could affect our country. Secondly, I present news in a non-scary way. All the other news organizations can scare you for clickbait and audience share. I want to be different. I want you to see that things aren't as bad as you've been hearing. Finally, at the end of each episode, I share some motivation and encouragement, because we can all use a little of that. After all, life is hard, and pep talks help. What is going on, guys? I am so glad you're here, and I am so glad that God has blessed me with another week, and that I get to do another show, and that I've got you guys here listening to me right now. So, if you're hearing my voice right now, I hope you're not taking your life for granted, and that you're thankful for all the good things happening in your life. I know we all go through lots of valleys, but we need to do a better job of being thankful when times are good. It's been a little bit of a challenging week here in the Mitchell household. We had to put one of our two dogs down this week, so that's very sad. And so it is, that just kind of brings home just a bit of a sadness. I'm just thankful we have another dog to try to keep our spirits up. But I learned something this week, which I thought I'd start the show with, and then we'll get into a ton of news. We got plenty of news. And as always, there will be timestamps. So if you want to jump forward, you can look in the episode notes, see the timestamps, or you can just sit back and enjoy the show. But I learned this week in things I did not know, and I'm betting you probably didn't know, because I'm pretty sure I've read a Teddy Roosevelt biography about 10 years ago, and so I must have forgotten this or not realized it was all within one day. But did you know that Teddy Roosevelt lost, and I'm talking about the former president, lost his mother, who was 50 at the time, and his wife, who was 22. He lost both of them on the same day, within hours of each other. And I saw this initially on X or Twitter, and I almost couldn't believe it, so I had to look it up. And then, so I've got a confirmation link in the episode notes if you want to go look on the History Channel, just to confirm it. But yeah, he was in the state legislature in New York, found out that one of them was ill, headed home, and later learned that both had passed within hours of each other. So, if you're going through something rough, to put it in perspective, unless you lost your mother and your wife within hours, that's a lot. That is a lot. I can't even wrap my arms around that. But if you look in the episode notes, I put a photo there of his journal entry from that day. And for that day, it was Tuesday the 14th, 1884, he literally just wrote, "The light has gone out of my life. The light has gone out of my life." And it would be very hard to recover from that. But of course we know he did, and we know he became a great president. And so that's why I always try to do my best to cheer people up, because I know life is hard. We all get kicked, we all get stomped, we all get knocked down. But we got to keep going. We can't ever give up, and so we gotta keep going. And I hope that perspective, that thought, does something for you. It was, in a weird way, inspiring. I know it's hard for bad news to be inspiring, but to think that someone could recover from that and become stronger and keep going and then end up inspiring others is, in its own way, kind of an inspiring story for me. So, again, I've got links to that in the episode notes. If you want to take a look at it, dig into it, learn a little bit more, that'd be awesome. I always like to share some history from time to time, and so if you learn something, you can share that with someone else, because I bet they did not know that. We are going to begin the news by talking about just a quick update on Ukraine funding in the House, what the latest is there. And I said a quick update, but honestly it may not be as quick as I glance at my notes here as I initially thought. But let's begin with the fact that pretty much nothing has happened since last week, And B, one of the things that could be causing this, according to a top Republican in the House of Representatives. So again, this is going to come from a top Republican in the House of Representatives. It's Representative Michael McCall. This is not some moderate or someone on the left or anything like that. This is the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, a very powerful person. And he was quoted as saying that Russian propaganda has infected the Republican Party. So again, a top Republican has said that Russian propaganda has infected the Republican Party. In fact, he said that some of the nighttime entertainment shows, that he sees Russian propaganda in some of it, and that it's almost identical to what they're saying on Russian state television, and that same propaganda or disinformation is being played to U.S. audiences. So that is what a top Republican is saying. Again, this isn't President Biden. This isn't the chairman of the Democratic Party. This isn't Nancy Pelosi or AOC or anyone on the left. This is what a top Republican is saying. And this is one of the gentlemen who's actually trying to pass Ukraine aid. Now, as I said, not much has happened since last week. Just a little bit of talk. So let's get into the weeds a bit about why nothing has happened. This clip I'm about to play was recorded on The Bulwark a couple of days ago. That's obviously kind of a moderate conservative podcast and publication. And the interview is with former Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who's obviously a Republican, or at least a former Republican. I'm not sure if he considers himself a Republican at this point, but I want to share what he said because it helps explain the divided and kind of almost broken current situation between the two parties, because he's asked about these comments about Russian propaganda. And so there'll be a short clip where they play an interview answer on CNN, and then you'll hear former Congressman Adam Kinzinger's comments about how that even though these powerful congressmen see what's happening, because there's so much party loyalty, essentially nothing happens. Here's the clip.
A couple congressmen, a couple Mikes, a couple of your former colleagues, Mike McCall and Mike Turner, current Republicans, they both indicated over the weekend that they think some of their colleagues have become susceptible to Russian propaganda and are advancing it. Let's just take a listen real quick.
Let's turn to Ukraine, an issue that's important to you and your fellow Republican chairman, Michael McCall, who runs the Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman McCall made a comment this week about what he says sounds like Russian propaganda from some conservative media, and why it's so difficult to explain to Republican voters why supporting Ukraine is important. He told Julia Yaffe, quote, "I think Russian propaganda has made its way into the United States, unfortunately, and it's infected a good chunk of my party's base." He singled out primetime shows on conservative channels. Do you agree with him, and how big is this problem?
Oh, it is absolutely true. We see directly coming from Russia attempts to mask communications that are anti-Ukraine and pro-Russia messages, some of which we even hear being uttered on the House floor. I mean, there are members of Congress today who still incorrectly say that this conflict between Russia and Ukraine is over NATO, which of course it is not.
Just two Republican congressmen saying that. You think this would be front page news? Like, you have two Republican congressmen saying, "My party infected with Russian propaganda." Anyway, what's your take on all that?
Well, I mean, let's look in a different world. This has just been like a non-enemy France, right? If they're like, yeah, French propaganda, government of France, people would be outraged. Yeah. This is Russia. This isn't just some country that we're agnostic about. This is one of our enemies. Look, they're both right. Obviously, they're both right.
Yes.
But here's what really kind of drives me nuts about that, Tim. Yes, they're both right. They're also both going along with the Russian propaganda in the party. It's saying, yes, okay, Tim, I'm going to come in front of you because you have an audience that'll react well to this, which is what he did on CNN. Yes, Russian propaganda is infecting, and people are going to praise me for saying that. But then he goes back today, both of these mics will go back today to Washington, D.C., and not pull the trigger on forcing this bill to the floor. Now, maybe they will eventually, But it's been 6 months of them listening to Russian propaganda. And these aren't just two rank and file Republicans. These are the two Republicans that are head of the most powerful committees dealing with this issue, Foreign Affairs and Intel. And yet they'll go on CNN and say it. And again, I don't want to discourage that. So I'm not sitting here just like crapping all over, but it's like, at the same time, you two alone.
Consider Newsmax.
Yeah, you go to Newsmax, go to Fox, put out a tweet. You two alone, without anybody else with you, can guarantee that the aid bill gets on the floor. And yet again, it's this, go to the correct, news outlet where you can say the things, because nobody on your Fox outlet's going to be watching CNN, and then just go quiet and let Marjorie Taylor Greene run the day. That's what drives me nuts, because this isn't just an exercise in what are our tax rates going to be, are the trains going to run on time? This is human life. And it just drives me nuts.
I hope you found that as enlightening as I did, and just a good example of how Washington is so paralyzed right now with the parties, even when they want to get something done. There's party loyalty. There are games about what channels do you go on and say certain things, and when you're on another channel, don't say those things. It's all a very frustrating situation. And so I wanted to share that clip to help you get a better understanding of it. Just the same way that after I heard that, I'm like, that makes sense. One other thing before we move on. I want to share one other clip from that show, from the Bulwark podcast and that interview with Congressman Kinzinger, for a couple of reasons. First, we know there are 2 discharge petitions, and so he's going to tell you what he thinks the chances of those passing are. And as a reminder, the discharge petitions are a way to work around Speaker Mike Johnson. So he talks briefly about that, but he also talks about kind of goes into the weeds a bit on why people like Marjorie Taylor Greene have so much power. And so he goes a little bit into the details of how procedural votes are causing an issue in the House of Representatives. And I'm clearly not an expert on Congress, but I'm frustrated more things aren't being done. And so this was very educational for me, and I think if you take a couple of minutes to listen to it, you're going to learn something yourself. So here are his comments on both the discharge petitions, the chances of success, and why someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene has so much power because of how they're using the procedural rules in the House.
It's that hard to exert your will if morons like Marjorie Taylor Greene can do it, So, what could they do? Why aren't they doing it?
I can get long-winded on this, so if I am, just give me a signal,
okay.
Right? Okay?
Yeah, all right.
Here's the thing. When you go to Congress, the first thing they tell you is, on procedural votes. Now, procedural votes are things like rules. Rules, you have to vote on a rule before any bill or any action on the floor happens. So it's basically the House saying, okay, here's how many minutes of debate, et cetera, et cetera. Okay?
Right.
So anytime there's a bill that comes on the floor, there has to be a rule vote.
Before the bill vote, before any amendments, before any motions.
And before the discussions, yep. And so that's one thing. Then you have other stuff, which I won't go into, called like motions to recommit, whatever. All that is called procedural votes, okay? What it means, it just governs procedure. When you go to Congress, your party says, look, we all have to vote together on these issues. And that was the agreement. Like, you can disagree with the bill, but you got to support your party on the floor rules. The Freedom Caucus is the ones that started violating that really for the first time, at least in modern history, where they now will vote against rules. And what that does is it can shut down the floor from doing anything. So imagine being in D.C. for 2 weeks, and now you have a group of people saying the floor can do nothing, including even really come into session. So that's why they have such power. So if there's a group of 10 of us sitting in a room and I hand everybody a hand grenade.
So just really quick before we get to the hand grenade analogy for the layman out there. So when people hear that Mike Johnson isn't bringing something to the floor, part of that is the speaker's discretion, but part of that is because there's a group of people that are like, no, we're not going to let you bring it to the
Yeah.
floor because we'll vote down the rule. Right.
Yeah.
That's essentially how it's going.
They'll we'll vote down the rule, and you'll see that in some of the kind of, keep the government open stuff.
Yeah.
Or they'll, as you see right now, softly threaten him with a motion to vacate. Right. And he doesn't want to get vacated. And so that's why he's kind of paralyzed. And I think he is paralyzed right now, to be honest with you. But if you put 10 people in a room, I give everybody a hand grenade, we all have the equal amount of power. Right? None of us will want to pull the pin on that hand grenade. But if there is a psycho in that room that wants to all of a sudden pull the pin on that hand grenade, they become the most powerful person, even though we all have the same tools. And that's what you've seen in the Freedom Club. I call them the Freedom Club because it's like there's nothing serious about them.
They're not a caucus. They haven't earned the right to be a caucus.
No. You got to be a respectable American for that. But they are willing to pull the pin on the hand grenade. And the problem is, until you call their bluff and one of the 10 pulls the hand grenade, until you're willing to be like, all right, I can play this game too and see if they're very serious, they're always going to be the most powerful person. So that's the moment with the Ukraine stuff right now. You have discharge petitions, which I can get into if you're curious, but neither of those are going to pass. What can really happen to compel this is if just 2, maybe it takes 3, it depends how many are in D.C. that day, sane Republicans go to the Speaker of the House and say, we, like the Freedom Caucus does, we will vote against every rule with the Democrats that comes to the floor until you agree to put the aid package on the floor for an up or down vote. He would be forced to do that, by the way, because now nothing could happen on the floor. And it would actually give Speaker Johnson cover to get this done, right? Because he'd be like, I have to, guys. But nobody's got the courage to do it. I don't get it. If I was still in D.C., Tim, this is the one thing I would be doing is voting against every rule. I would be staying in D.C. I would be on every microphone, which I'm good at, and just be like, I'm going to shut down the floor until they put this on the floor.
Now, if by chance you want to hear that full interview, I do have the link to it in the episode notes. The entire episode's really good. And I've got to say, people often try to get me to weigh in on whether I think it's going to pass under the leadership of Mike Johnson or not. And at this point, I am increasingly skeptical. I heard today that Speaker Johnson will be having a press conference on Friday with the former president, Donald Trump. We know that former President Donald Trump does not support funding, and it just seems to me that Speaker Mike Johnson has continually just raised these small gambits. And initially, I kind of fell for some of them. He would say it was important. He would do an interview. He will get your hopes up. And then he will turn around and make some excuse for why that can't happen. And then the next week, there's some other bit of hope or some kind of, hey, this is something else we're looking at or exploring. You guys know I've covered some of these in previous podcast episodes. I will say I'm in some pretty good company at this point. This isn't just my thinking. There's a pretty famous professor at Yale of history. His name's Timothy Snyder. He weighs in quite often, has written lots of books, weighs in quite often on national security issues. He's visited Ukraine. He's even met with President Volodymyr Zelensky in an interview. And so he's a pretty well-read person, very well-respected. And I want to share what he wrote about the situation. And I quote, I don't think Ukraine aid is going to pass without a discharge petition that allows a simple vote. I do think what Speaker Mike Johnson is doing now is specifically designed to prevent the discharge petition from getting enough votes. And of course, as a reminder, the discharge petition would work around Speaker Mike Johnson. All right, continuing what Timothy Snyder, the professor, said. By bringing up Ukraine, he is giving members of Congress an excuse not to sign the discharge petition. For the last 6 months, all of Johnson's ploys have had the same logic. Make a promise, create some hope, generate excuses for European and executive branch inaction, weaken Ukraine, and then advance Russian genocide, which I don't want to go so far as to say that, but it's certainly true that this inaction is causing dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of additional Ukrainian civilian casualties, as well as higher casualties among Ukraine's military. It's also allowing for Russian advance on the front line. But I'll continue the quote from Professor Snyder. Press coverage dwells now on hope rather than recalling that Speaker Mike Johnson's entire record thus far as the Speaker of the House involves dishonest gambits to prevent Ukraine funding. If you are a member of Congress, please sign the discharge petition. So there you go. There's someone that's on the same page pretty much of where I am. Just does not look very good unless they finally decide to sign one of the discharge petitions. And again, there are two. Neither one of them are very close because one is mostly a Democratic bill and another one's kind of a gambit that the Republicans put up. But between the two, it's going to be very challenging to get either one of those passed. So that was a fair amount of pessimism, and you guys know I am naturally, or I try to be, an optimistic person. So let's share a couple of good bits of news for Ukraine since last week. The first one involves the Biden administration and the State Department announced an emergency $138 million sale of some Hawk missile system maintenance and parts for the Hawk missile systems that the U.S. had provided more than a year ago. And apparently this sale, again it's a sale, it's not aid, so Ukraine is paying for this. But the $138 million worth of parts is part of an urgent need for some maintenance support to keep the missile system running, according to the Pentagon. Now, the Hawk missiles are medium range again. They're surface to air, so they are stationed on the ground. They launch up into the sky, and the State Department said that Ukraine has an urgent need to increase its capabilities to defend against Russian missile strikes and the aerial capabilities of Russian forces. Maintaining and sustaining the Hawk weapon system will enhance Ukraine's ability to defend its people and protect critical national infrastructure. Now, the Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin got grilled on this during a Capitol Hill hearing on Tuesday, and during that hearing, Secretary Lloyd Austin said that Ukraine matters, and the outcome of the conflict in Ukraine will have global implications for our national security, Lloyd Austin said. He said that if Ukraine falls, it could imperil the Baltic NATO members who are neighbors of Ukraine, and it could potentially drag U.S. troops into a prolonged European war. The second bit of good news regarding weapons is that, and this one makes me chuckle, but the U.S. announced that it will be transferring weapons that the United States confiscated from Iran that were being shipped to the Houthi rebels in Yemen. We've talked a bit about them in the past, but essentially because the United States has boarded some ships and searched them and found illegal cargo, namely weapons, that were headed to basically fund these Houthi fighters. These weapons and ammunition was seized, and the Department of Justice has approved transferring these weapons, all of this ammunition, to Ukraine. So we have to thank our good friends in Iran for this, but it's actually a pretty good haul, although unfortunately it's light weapons. It's nothing that, that's going to make any drastic changes, but it does involve 5,000 AK-47 rifles. It involves machine guns, sniper rifles, RPG-7s. Those are the anti-tank rockets that you often see terrorists running around and shooting. and it includes 500,000 rounds of 7.62 millimeter ammunition. And in fact, it's enough armament that the U.S. estimates it would be able to equip one Ukrainian brigade with small arms rifles. So I am sure they will be thankful for that. Although it does, as I read it, it does remind me that Ukraine faces so many logistical nightmares because, as I've said in some previous podcasts, they're switching over slowly but surely to NATO weapons. NATO weapons, of course, fire 5.56 millimeter, and so by sending this weapons cache over there, which is 7.62, their AK-47s, everything that I've just named is basically communist bloc or Soviet era weaponry. But even if it was used to help arm some reservists in the rear, then I am sure Ukraine will be glad to have it. In fact, Ukraine is currently expanding its military with a wider conscription that was recently approved by the legislature, so I'm sure this will help arm some Ukrainians who are willing and need to help defend their homeland. But again, thank you, Iran, for these weapons. We do appreciate it, and I'm sure the Ukrainians do as well. I want to mention one final thing about Ukraine before we move to some other topics. And that is, and I've put this in the episode notes because you almost have to see it to believe it. It's just a short clip, but it's a clip of typical Russian media and opinion leaders talking around a circle, and they are just joking about, you really can't make this up, but they're joking about obliterating cities in France and joking about which one they ought to do first. And it just reminds me, if you don't keep up with the war very much, this kind of talk by Russian opinion leaders, and these are their primary media channels, happens on an almost nightly basis. And they are always just joking about dropping nuclear weapons on France, or attacking Poland and taking it, or attacking Germany. Or a couple of months ago, they were joking that Russia should try to retake Alaska from the United States. There's always this kind of cocky arrogance, but there's also just a heartlessness to it. They are just it's very cold. It's very almost unhuman-like to just watch them joking about these things. And I know it's propaganda, but it is getting piped into the homes of millions of Russians. And unfortunately, this callousness that they display, it is something that it's contagious. It spreads. And so when you see war crimes happening inside Ukraine, when you see kids who are abducted and put on buses and trains and taken back to Russia, as more than 20,000 have been, to be re-educated, or when you hear stories of women that are raped, or see video of Ukrainian soldiers who have given up, hands in the air, some of them even bound, hands behind their back, already been processed, so to speak, on the battlefield, disarmed, and then executed. More than 50 have been documented with drone footage, bodies found on satellite, etc., and Ukrainian authorities have identified the soldiers who committed these crimes, and they are wanted. So this is not just suggestions or possibilities. These are documented war crimes, and you constantly see these kinds of things. And so I only put that in the episode notes because, as I say so often on this podcast, this is about more than Ukraine, and we can either help Ukraine stop what's happening, or it's quite clear that the Russian economy is in such shambles. The Russian quality of life is so poor that it is quite clear that Vladimir Putin has to keep his people distracted. They have to have an enemy. They have to have the evil West. They have to have something to focus on so that people aren't focused on the fact of just how bad life is inside Russia, just how bad their public transportation is, just how bad their infrastructure is. There was a major dam that collapsed inside Russia in the past 2 weeks. You can easily find this online by searching it. Several cities were flooded. One of them is as large as Tucson. Imagine if Tucson was flooded because a dam had leaked and then breached and basically had a partial collapse. The thing was built like less than 10 years ago, but because there's so much just rampant corruption inside Russia, where every single contractor, every single politician and military leader is stealing money from each of the various levels that the money is transferred or spent. There's just rampant corruption, and they have to keep their people distracted. So this is just something that we have to keep our eyes on, because this is just a reality. It's sickening, but it is a reality. It's just jarring to watch these folks talk about this stuff. I mean, this is like high school locker room talk that you would never want public, except they do it every single night in front of TVs to just joke about attacking Ukrainian cities or nuking French cities or attacking Poland. Just the way they do it with almost a glee. It's sickening, and it's cold, and it's cruel. We're going to take a quick break so I can tell you how you can support the show if you want to. But when we come back, we're going to talk about a really cool story involving special operations with U.S. Special Operations, which is, of course, the SEALs, Green Berets, Marine Raiders, Army Special Forces, etc., Army Rangers. But I'm going to talk about that a bit. And then we're going to talk just a bit about the latest involving China and the United States. And I talked a bit in the last couple of weeks about what's happening in the South China Sea. And so I'm going to do a slight update on that, and also a bit about some of the dangerous interactions between American and Chinese aircraft and ships that we've covered in some previous podcasts. If you've been listening for 4 or 5 or 6 months, going back a bit, there's an update on that I want to share. And then after that, we will definitely do the motivation segment at the end. But again, first, this commercial. If you'll hang with me, I'll be right back. Just a quick reminder, if you love what you're listening to and would like to support what I'm doing, you can sign up on my Substack page or on my Patreon page to help support the show. For $5 per month, you can help me grow this into something even bigger. And I think by doing that, in a weird way, you'll help contribute to me pulling off something I really want to do, but at a much larger level. You'll help unify our country, you'll help educate more voters, and ultimately, you'll help more people become more engaged and better informed. We all know that studies prove that more informed, more engaged citizens lead to a better government, and ultimately, that will lead to a better country. I really do have some big dreams for this platform, including increased frequency, but I do need some help getting there. Currently, the show is only supported by listeners such as yourself. We have no sponsors or advertisers. But no pressure, especially if you're new. If you're new, just sit back and enjoy it. But if you've been enjoying this for a while, if it's helped bring a sense of calm and faith in our country, then please consider helping support the show. Details for signing up can be found on my Substack page and in the episode notes. Thanks in advance for your support. I really do appreciate it. Thanks for hanging with us, you hardcore fans out there. I appreciate that. I think this will be worth sticking around for. First thing I want to talk about is U.S. Special Operations are making their case for the future. And this week, it was probably one of those situations where every department, whether it's the Navy or the Air Force or the Army or the Marine Corps or any of them, they often have to say, go to Congress and explain why their job is important, why they should be funded, why their mission is crucial. And so they all do this, and they all kind of jockey for position. And that happened this past week. But in the jockeying of position, a lot of really cool stuff came out. And so I wanted to just dive into that a bit, because as we know, since 9/11, the attacks on 9/11 with the U.S. response in Afghanistan, in Iraq, special operations really kind of developed this reputation for having to deal with counterterrorism, having to, basically chase down the bad guys, raid houses. We all know the famous raid on bin Laden's house. And so they kind of got this operational reputation for being very specific for counterterrorism. And as folks have worried about a conflict and a realignment of our defense forces to counter Russia and to counter China, the special operations community has been wondering where it fits into it. And I think some of the big generals have been wondering where they fit into it. And so special operations had one of its leaders, actually a couple of them, go to Congress. In the past couple of weeks, they've been trying to make that case. And so I just want to share a little bit about what they discussed, because it was eye-opening for me, so I'm pretty sure it will be for you as well. One thing they emphasized is that special operation forces were around well before the global war on terror. They were around long before 9/11, and that actually they go all the way back to World War II, when back then it was called the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS. And their leaders at Special Ops were trying to remind Congress that they played a crucial role not only in counterinsurgency during the Vietnam War, but that also during the Cold War, that they filled gaps in the great power confrontation that was essentially the alignment of the two forces. And so some of the things that their leaders said this past week I thought was pretty good, but they actually talked about how, and I guess I knew this, but you forget it sometimes, special operators had actually been inside Ukraine before the Russian invasion. In fact, going all the way back to the 1990s, special operations folks have been training Ukrainian forces. That training picked up once Russia invaded initially in 2014. That was back when Vladimir Putin illegally annexed Crimea, or the Crimean Peninsula, which has that big naval base that I often talk about. And so American Special Operations Forces were helping train Ukraine during that time. Now, and they actually detailed some of the training they did, including tactics, procedures. They trained their Special Forces folks inside Ukraine. They helped make their NCO Corps a little bit stronger. Those are the corporals and the sergeants. Because obviously Ukraine was changing from a purely conscription-based history, such as the same way that China and the Soviet Union fought. Of course, now the Soviet Union's Russia, even though they act pretty much the same. But Ukraine was trying to create a professional military and become a sharper weapon so that it could not have such a large military and be more effective. And so special operations played a role in that. But what's interesting is it came out that they obviously have no boots on the ground right now, but special operations continues to train and advise Ukraine and its special operations folks right now. And they're doing it obviously by radio, video, etc. But it was an interesting bullet point that I don't think many of us were probably fully aware of. So they also talked about that, in the old days, teams would deploy with a rucksack and a weapon. But these days they often have to deploy with multiple computer systems because the human with the technology that's around them is far more proficient and more powerful than even 10, 15 years ago. And they made a strong argument that some of the very best soldiers, Marines, SEALs, etc., or sailors, go into special operations. They're very intelligent. Most of them have made a career of the military, and that it takes years and years to train and make these individuals capable, that you can't do it overnight. You can't downsize special operations, and then if something breaks out with Russia or China, just suddenly try to ramp it up, because these guys and gals, but they don't have 6 months of training. These folks have 5, 6, 7 years of training. We're talking scuba trained, airborne qualified, mountain warfare, jungle warfare, all of the things that they learn to do. The stuff takes time. It takes a long time to get good at this. So I thought that was a pretty cool story worth sharing, that they are making their case that as we position against China, as we try to build some of our alliances on these islands, try to train some of the local forces with these various countries that are wanting our help to counter China, special operations believe they have a very large role that they will play in the years to come. So I'll put the link to that story if you want to go take a look at it. They did actually release some information about it, so pretty cool story if you got a few minutes to look at it. Alright, so let's end the news portion by talking about China, and possibly some sort of-ish good news there. I'll share a link in the episode notes if you want to dig into it just a bit, but the U.S. military and their Chinese counterparts had some meetings recently, and are continuing some meetings to try to again work toward preventing some type of accidental escalation, where, you know, we've talked about in previous episodes how they'll have their ships veer too close to U.S. naval ships, or they'll go in the path of U.S. Navy ships, or their fighter jets will come too close to American fighter jets, and they will do various things. Well, as I said last year as we were covering this story, it was a bigger story then because there were a lot of near incidents that happened. Since that time, obviously President Biden and President Xi met in San Francisco, and that at that meeting it was announced that, hey, we have to have military-to-military communication. Because as a reminder, back then there was no military-to-military communication, which, you know, during the Cold War, even at the scariest of times, Russia, or at that time the Soviet Union and the United States, had communication. If units were near each other, if something dangerous or something possibly, you know, potentially was beginning to escalate, we were able to pick up the phone and call each other and make sure that nothing was going on, that one side wasn't about to attack the other, that how can we de-escalate this before an accident happens. And so we didn't have that with China. One of the goals of the meeting between President Biden and President Xi last year was, we've got to start that. As you recall, I think I reported back in November or so that for about 4 to 6 weeks after that, China blew off the United States. And so it looked like, to some degree, that President Biden had kind of gotten played, that President Xi had agreed to something that he wasn't following through on. But eventually, after far too long, there was communication between our military and their. That was General Brown at the time. And since then, and I should say the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff was Air Force General Brown, who had that meeting. That was finally had the meeting in December. In January, some additional meetings were happening. And now, reminder, just for those checking the notes, no meetings had happened since September 2021. So 2 years of almost no meetings, no communication. President Biden meets with President Xi, then the two top generals get together, and then some lower ranking officers start getting together, and now some additional meetings are happening. And I do have some good news on that front, which is that there has actually been, according to our military, an observed reduction in unsafe behavior between U.S. military and Chinese aircraft and vessels over the last several months. So, good news is there's been some, lightening of tension. Now, during these meetings, they did bring up what I've talked about the past couple of weeks, which is the routine maritime operations that the Philippines are trying to conduct in the South China Sea. And of course, as I've talked about, China was almost blockading this island. There wasn't any huge resolution on that. The U.S. says they're going to continue to press China on these issues, but it is worth noting that in the past week, President Biden and President Xi did have another phone discussion where they talked about a whole wide range of issues, places where some cooperation could happen and some areas where there was differences. And again, during that phone call, President Biden emphasized the importance of maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, and they discussed the situation in the Philippines. So, hoping that dialogue is good, obviously. Having these fighter pilots of theirs not acting too out of control around ours is a good thing. Communication is good. And I'm hoping that, maybe this again will help ease some of the tension so that we can continue again to move forward without either side provoking the other into some kind of situation that none of us want. I've said for more than a year now that I hope China takes the right path and continues to not do what maybe their darker side wants to do in regards to Taiwan and some of the military expansion that they would love to do, I'm sure. But hey, we've got to look for progress and good news when we can and where we can. And I've always said that one of my goals with the show is to obviously be honest and shoot straight with you guys, but not try to ramp up fear, not try to use bait-click or anything, or clickbait or anything like that. So, to me, this was some good news, and so I wanted to share the good news. Alright, let's wrap up the news there. It is time for the best part of the show, and that is what I call the never, ever give up segment. It's a bit of a motivational segment that I hope speaks to you a little bit. I call it that because as a country, we can never, ever give up, despite division, massive debt, probably future problems that none of us can even predict. I firmly believe we can never give up as a country, and we must stay united. But I also believe that as individuals, we must never, ever give up. We've got family and friends counting on us, so in this section, I'm going to do my best to try to share some inspiration and motivation to help encourage you. We are going to begin by honoring a Medal of Honor recipient. If you don't know, the Medal of Honor is the highest military decoration you can possibly earn in the military, and it's awarded to service members who have distinguished themselves by acts of incredible valor. The medal is typically awarded by the President of the United States upon the recommendation of the Armed Services, and the following individual, his name is Staff Sergeant Lucian Adams. Again, Staff Sergeant Lucian Adams. He served in World War II, and he earned this award in April 23rd, 1945. As a reminder from last week, I'm just going in alphabetical order, so this is the second one I've done. His name's Staff Sergeant Lucian Adams. Adams was serving with his company in late October. It was October 28th, 1944, and they were serving in France. His company was attempting to break through the Mortagna forest. They were trying to reopen a supply line to an isolated battalion that was attached to their regiment. During the fighting of that, Staff Sergeant Adams braved concentrated machine gun fire in a one-man assault on a force of German troops. Although his company had progressed less than 10 yards and had already lost 3 killed and 6 wounded, Staff Sergeant Adams charged forward, dodging from tree to tree, firing a borrowed BAR from the hip. That was a light machine gun back then. despite intense machine gun fire, which the enemy directed at him, and rifle grenades which struck the trees over his head, showering him with broken twigs and branches. Staff Sergeant Adams made his way to within 10 yards of the closest machine gun and killed the gunner with a hand grenade. An enemy soldier threw hand grenades at him from a position only 10 yards distant. However, Staff Sergeant Adams dispatched him with a single burst of BAR fire. Charging into the vortex of the enemy fire, he killed another machine gunner at 15 yards range with a hand grenade and forced the surrender of 2 supporting infantrymen. Although the remainder of the German group concentrated the full force of their automatic weapons fire in a desperate attempt to knock him out, he proceeded through the woods to find and exterminate 5 more of the enemy. Finally, when the 3rd machine gun from the Germans opened up on him at a range of 20 yards, Staff Sergeant Adams killed the gunner with his BAR. In the course of the action, he personally killed 9 Germans, eliminated 3 enemy machine gun nests, and vanquished a specialized force which was armed with automatic weapons and grenade launchers. In so doing, he cleared the woods of hostile elements and reopened the severed supply lines to the cut-off battalion. Again, what I just read to you is the award citation. I just really believe it's important that every week I try to do our best to remind all of us of the sacrifices that have been made through the nearly 250 years of American history. And I know for me it's a staggering thing to think about, but more than 1 million Americans have died in war, getting us to where we are in this place and time in this country. And I think that's something we can never forget. I think it's important we remember it and that we honor those sacrifices. Now, let's share some motivation to make sure that we never, ever give up in our own personal lives as well. Of course, if you're a regular listener, you know I also speak about never giving up when I discuss PTSD at the end of the show. But for now, let's just talk about some motivation. And we've got some great ones this week. So let's just begin with the first one. Life is too short to waste time with bad moods. Keep it happy. Again, life is too short to waste time with bad moods. Keep it happy. Next one. Follow your passion. Listen to your heart. Trust the process. Be grateful. Life is magic and your dreams matter. Again, follow your passion. Listen to your heart. Trust the process. Be grateful. Life is magic and your dreams matter. This next one's a quote from Keanu Reeves, who's of course a pretty famous actor. Every struggle in your life has shaped you into the person you are today. Be thankful for the hard times. They can only make you stronger. It's a good one. Next one's a quote by a gentleman by the name of Wayne Dyer. If you believe it will work out, you'll see opportunities. If you believe it won't, you will see obstacles. This next one's a great one if you're going through a hard time right now. The quote is from Maya Angelou. The quote is, every storm runs out of rain. Again, every storm runs out of rain. And let's do one more. Stop worrying about what could be and enjoy what is. Again, stop worrying about what could be and enjoy what is. So often we are looking to that next stage in life or that next step or that next day or that next week, sometimes even the next year. But stop worrying about what could be and enjoy what is. That's some great wisdom there. And then I always like to share a few from the Bible because this book has become such a source of strength and wisdom and calm even for me during the past year. So I hope by sharing just a few it might encourage you to get into the Bible yourself because I think it'll really help you. Here's the first one. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. That's from Psalms chapter 46, verse 1. Again, the verse is, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Next one's from Psalms as well, chapter 86, verse 11. Teach me your way, O Lord, that I may walk in your truth. Unite my heart to fear your name. Again, teach me your way, O Lord, that I may walk in your truth. Unite my heart to fear your name. And then the final one this week is also from Psalms, chapter 63, verses 7 and 8. Because you are my help, I sing in the shadow of your wings. My soul clings to you. Your right hand upholds me. Again, the verses are, because you are my help, I sing in the shadow of your wings. My soul clings to you. Your right hand upholds me. Thanks so much for joining us on this episode. I hope as you go through this week that you act a little nicer on social media and in the world as well. Smile at folks in the grocery store, do small acts of kindness, and remember that most Americans are good, and they will help you in an emergency, even if you don't agree politically. Now, I have to finish with two things. I want to say a bit about myself and my books in case you're new to the show, and then I need to say some words for those struggling with PTSD or mental illness, especially since veterans are at a 57% higher risk of suicide. First, a bit about myself and my books. I am a military vet. I spent 4 years in the Marine Corps, all of that time in the infantry, and yes, that does matter. After my enlistment, I went to college at the University of Tennessee. I became a journalist. I spent more than 10 years in the news business. Besides all of that, I've also written 12 books. Those books include a series about a Marine Corps sniper, several novels about a police detective and a private investigator, and a few books about war, such as World War II and Afghanistan. Basically, these are all fast-moving books with lots of action and plot twists, because those are the kind of books I've always enjoyed reading. You can find all of those books in the link in the episode notes, or you can look on Amazon by just searching my name, Stan R. Mitchell. Buying a book, telling a friend about a book, or buying one as a gift for someone, friend or loved one, is a great way to help support the show. And in all seriousness, they're pretty highly rated, and I've been very fortunate to have sold 70,000 copies to date. And I promise you, even though I live in Tennessee, I do not have that many cousins. The second thing I need to talk about is PTSD and suicide for just a moment. This isn't just for our veterans, although I know PTSD does seem to affect veterans at a much higher rate, but it's for anyone. We can all get in a really low spot, but we have to remember that it's a season. It's a valley. If you're having serious issues, please call 988-SELECT-1. You can talk to a crisis line responder anytime, day or night. Whether you're a civilian or a veteran, it doesn't matter. But I do know this is hard to do, and I know most of you won't, so I have to be a little mean here. The fact is that when we had a drill instructor in boot camp pushing us, or maybe a tough coach back in high school, you know that you can go further than when it's just yourself pushing you. So I'm going to be that person. I'm going to be mean for just a moment, and I have to remind you that you cannot give up. Do not lose this fight. Do not make your parents or your family have to plan your funeral. Don't make them feel guilty that they did not check on you, that they could not reach you. You can hold on another day, and if you do, I promise the next day will be a little easier. Now, again, if you're in a fight that you worry you may lose, call someone. Call a friend or a family member. Please, just do that. Or call 988-SELECT-1. But whatever you do, do not quit. You're in a valley, and this world needs you. Probably your parents need you. I mean, seriously, who's going to take care of your parents in 30 years? I'm being dead serious here. I just helped take care of my mom while she fought with cancer before she passed. I'm helping take care of my dad now. But who's going to do it for you? Are you going to let the system take care of them? How horrible is that? So you cannot quit. And believe me, there's something you're meant to do. You just can't see it because you're in this immediate fog and pain. You can't see that end result. But there's a mission for you to do. Maybe it's to coach Little League. Maybe it's to help others with PTSD. Maybe it's to run for office. But there's some calling for you. You just haven't found it. But you need to get involved. You need to stop isolating yourself. Go visit a veterans group, the VFW. Visit a church near you. Talk to some family that you have lost touch with. Or maybe reach out to that friend that you've grown apart from. They're probably dying to talk to you. But seriously, if you're struggling, call the hotline 988 and select 1. Or you can also start moving toward God. If you're not willing to make that phone call, read the Bible if you never have. I think it will help. Read some of Psalms or Proverbs, or start with the New Testament, maybe Luke. I think you'll find that the Bible will start drawing you in and changing your life. If you don't have a Bible, you can download a Bible app on your phone, or you can look it up online. There are dozens of sites with it. Even simpler, I have a link in the episode notes that I think can help you. I write a faith-based blog about the Bible and God, and I have a link in my episode notes to a pretty powerful story about my dog, who is a stray that we adopted from the shelter. The title of the article is Be Like Ozzy. Go near your master. I've had a lot of people tell me that story really helped move them, that it was very impactful. So, it's free to read. You got nothing to lose by going to read it. Now, I always like to end each show by reminding people that you can comment anytime. I try to monitor those. You can also reach out privately by email to me at authorstanrmitchell@yahoo.com. And that's in the episode notes, by the way. But again, it's authorstanrmitchell@yahoo.com. Hey, here's one other thing. This podcast is about defense news, but I also do a political blog. So if you love my moderate, optimistic views, you might enjoy that. It's called Thoughts from a Southern Gentleman. You can find a link to the episode notes to that as well, or you can just search that on Google. Hey, thanks for hanging with me this week. It's truly an honor to talk with each of you, and to know that there's a few of you out there who are listening and who care about our country and our military and all the issues that we face. I know there are a lot of scary issues out there, but we're going to get through them together, the same way America's gotten through everything before this. I love you all, but never forget that God loves you more than you can possibly imagine. He is our true Father, so I hope you spend some time with Him this week. If you want true peace and strength and wisdom, make sure you read your Bible some this week. It'll help you a lot. And also, reach out to a friend or anyone who you know is struggling. Whether they are young or old, life is truly hard. We know this. But the true strength of this country is its people, and that includes you folks listening to me right now. So be a leader, be a doer, be a servant to someone. With all of that being said, I'll catch you all next week. You have been listening to The View from the Front. I hope you enjoyed the show.